The desert stretched endlessly, its golden sands shimmering under the merciless Egyptian sun. For centuries, explorers, adventurers, and treasure hunters had wandered through these dunes, each one dreaming of unearthing a secret buried for millennia. But in the early 20th century, one man carried that dream with more obsession than most: Howard Carter. Carter was no stranger to the mysteries of Egypt. He had spent years digging in the Valley of the Kings, convinced that hidden beneath the shifting sands lay a tomb untouched by time. Others laughed at him. Many claimed that every pharaoh's resting place had already been plundered, its treasures stolen, its walls desecrated. But Carter believed otherwise. Somewhere in the valley, he argued, there lay a king whose name had been forgotten, but whose tomb still whispered to the sands. For years, his work yielded little but dust and disappointment. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy English aristocrat with a taste for adventure, grew restless. "Perhaps we should call it quits," Carnarvon muttered more than once. The expense was enormous, and the returns non-existent. Yet Carter begged for one more season, one more chance. In November of 1922, that chance came. Carter's team uncovered a step carved into the rock. Excitement rippled through the camp. They dug further, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Each strike of the pickaxe seemed to echo across time. By the end of the day, they had uncovered a sealed doorway, its plaster still intact, marked with the royal insignia. Carter's heart pounded. Could this be it? Could this be the discovery that would shake the world of archaeology to its core? He sent word to Lord Carnarvon immediately. The tomb would not be opened without him. For days the team waited, the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. The desert winds carried whispers, as if the ancient spirits themselves stirred in warning. When Carnarvon finally arrived, the men gathered at the entrance. Carter held a candle as he chipped away a small hole in the sealed doorway. Slowly, he pressed his eye to the gap. Behind him, Carnarvon could barely contain his impatience. "Can you see anything?" he asked, his voice trembling. Carter's words would become immortal. "Yes, wonderful things." Through the flickering light, Carter saw gold. Everywhere. Gold. Chairs, chariots, statues, all piled together in dazzling disarray. The tomb had been sealed for more than 3,000 years, and its treasures had lain untouched. At that moment, they knew they had made the greatest archaeological discovery of the century: the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. News spread like wildfire. The world's press descended on Egypt. Photographers, journalists, and scholars flooded the Valley of the Kings, eager to witness the opening of a pharaoh's resting place. Egyptomania gripped the West. Suddenly the young and little-known pharaoh, who had died at just 18, was the most famous king in the world. But as excitement soared, so too did unease. The tomb's sealed doorway bore strange inscriptions. Locals whispered of curses, warnings written in the language of the ancients, promising death to any who dared disturb the eternal rest of the pharaoh. The foreign journalists laughed, treating it as exotic superstition. But among the Egyptians, the belief ran deeper. They knew the power of the past, and they feared what had been unleashed. Inside the tomb, the air was heavy, stale, untouched for millennia. The walls were painted with scenes of the afterlife, gods and demons guiding the young king into eternity. Every artifact glittered with otherworldly beauty. Yet with every step deeper into the chambers, the sense of trespassing grew stronger. This was not just a burial chamber. It was a sacred space, guarded by forces beyond comprehension. Carter, Carnarvon, and their team pressed on, ignoring the whispers. They catalogued treasures, opened coffins, and marveled at the boy king's golden mask. For them, it was history, science, discovery. For others, it was desecration. And then, the deaths began. Within months of the tomb's opening, Lord Carnarvon was struck down. A mosquito bite on his cheek turned septic. Fever racked his body. He cried out in agony before slipping into delirium. At the exact moment of his death, The lights in Cairo flickered and went dark. Back in England, Carnarvon's beloved dog let out a howl and fell dead. Newspapers declared, "The curse of the Pharaoh strikes." What began as whispers soon became a roar. Reporters tallied every illness, every accident, every unexplained death among those connected to the tomb. The story grew, each headline more sensational than the last. A simple excavation had become something far darker, a legend of a curse, a tale of divine retribution. The world was enthralled and terrified. The tomb of Tutankhamun had become the center of the world's attention. Egypt's Valley of the Kings, once a silent landscape of stone and sand, now swarmed with photographers, journalists, scholars, and curious onlookers. Every step of the excavation was reported in detail, every artifact displayed as if the earth itself were unveiling secrets it had hidden for millennia. Howard Carter stood at the center of this storm, meticulously overseeing the work. He was a man of discipline and patience, determined that the excavation should be conducted with scientific precision. Yet around him, the world cared less for method and more for spectacle. Lord Carnarvon, his patron, reveled in the fame. For years he had financed Carter's dig with little to show for it. Now, he was the man who had unlocked the most dazzling treasure in modern history. He basked in the glow of journalists' flashbulbs, unaware that his time was short. Carnarvon's death was sudden and cruel. The small mosquito bite on his cheek seemed harmless at first. But it festered, infection spreading rapidly through his body. Within days he was bedridden with fever. Doctors struggled in vain as his condition worsened. On the night he died, strange coincidences unfolded. Cairo was plunged into darkness as its lights mysteriously failed, and in far-off England, Carnarvon's dog howled once before dropping dead. The press seized on it instantly. The curse of the Pharaoh. Headlines screamed across Europe and America. What had begun as whispers among locals now became international hysteria. "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king's peace," they claimed, the tomb's inscription warned. But this was only the beginning. Within weeks, other misfortunes followed. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier who had visited the tomb, fell ill shortly after returning to France and died of pneumonia. Another member of the team, Arthur Mace, succumbed to arsenic poisoning under mysterious circumstances. Soon after, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who had X-rayed the Pharaoh's mummy, collapsed and never recovered. One by one, names were added to the so-called death list. Accidents, strange illnesses, and sudden deaths all seemed to circle those who had dared enter the tomb. The curse's legend grew with every obituary. Carter, however, remained skeptical. He dismissed the stories as coincidence, insisting that every death had a rational explanation. He lived for years after the discovery, seemingly untouched by any supernatural force. Yet even his calm could not quiet the storm. The world wanted to believe in the curse. Newspapers sold millions of copies with tales of the Pharaoh's wrath. Audiences craved mystery, danger, and the sense that ancient powers still lingered in the sands of Egypt. Inside the tomb, the work pressed forward. Each chamber revealed new wonders: alabaster jars, jeweled daggers, and golden statues standing as if alive. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, as though the past resisted their intrusion. At the very heart of the tomb, Carter and his team found the nested shrines and coffins of Tutankhamun. Layer after layer of gilded wood and beaten gold enclosed the young king's body. Finally, they reached the golden mask that would become one of the most iconic artifacts in human history, the face of a boy king staring serenely from across 3,000 years. Yet with every artifact removed, unease deepened. Local workers whispered prayers as they carried relics into the light. Some refused to enter the tomb at all, fearing the wrath of the gods. Even foreign visitors began to feel the weight of the curse. By the mid-1920s, the list of the dead had grown long enough to terrify even the skeptical. Scholars, aristocrats, and workers connected to the excavation had all perished under strange circumstances. Some died of blood infections, others from sudden fevers, others in freak accidents. The pattern was too much for the public to ignore. To them, it was clear. Tutankhamun's tomb was cursed, and those who defied it paid with their lives. But was it truly the hand of the pharaoh reaching from beyond the grave, or something far more human and far more sinister? The mystery was only deepening. The death of Lord Carnarvon had already set the stage for hysteria, but as the years passed, the curse seemed to grow larger than the sands of Egypt itself. It was no longer a local legend whispered in Cairo's bazaars. It was a global phenomenon, carried by headlines, whispered at dinner tables, and dramatized in every theater of the Western imagination. In London, the Times published long dramatic features on the so-called curse, its language designed to both terrify and captivate. Across the Atlantic, American papers added their own sensational flourishes. Pharaoh's wrath strikes again, or King Tut claims another victim. Reporters kept a morbid scorecard, noting every sudden illness or accident among those who had come too close to the tomb. The pattern was chilling. George J. Gould, the American tycoon, dead within weeks of his visit. Prince Ali Camel Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who had walked through the tomb, shot dead under mysterious circumstances in London. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist, gone not long after examining the mummy. By 1929, more than a dozen men associated with the excavation were dead. The world watched with morbid fascination. Were these deaths simply bad luck? Or was something far darker at work? Carter himself remained a pillar of rationality. He gave speeches and interviews, rolling his eyes at talk of curses. He pointed out that dozens more people involved in the excavation were still alive and well. "If this is a curse," he told one reporter dryly, "it is a remarkably selective one." Yet even he could not fully silence the rumors. Too many strange coincidences haunted the story. When Sir Bruce Ingram, a close friend of Carter's, was given a paperweight made from a mummified hand, his house mysteriously burned down, then flooded during reconstruction. To the public, such tales were undeniable proof. The pharaoh was angry. In America, the curse became entertainment. Novelists wove it into lurid adventure stories. Hollywood seized upon it, birthing the first wave of mummy films in the 1930s. In these movies, ancient kings rose from their tombs to strangle the living, exacting vengeance on those who disturbed their slumber. What had begun as an archaeological find now fueled an entire genre of horror. But the hysteria carried a darker weight in Egypt itself. For Egyptians, the curse was not a sideshow but a reminder of their heritage. The land of the pharaohs was being stripped bare, its treasures carried to European museums, its sacred tombs invaded by foreign hands. The curse, many believed, was the spirits of the ancestors crying out against desecration. Some even claimed they could feel it. Guides reported strange winds howling through the Valley of the Kings at night. Local workers swore that the tomb itself groaned when no one was inside. There were whispers of shadows moving on the walls, of figures glimpsed in torchlight, and then gone. By the late 1920s, Tutankhamun's tomb was no longer just an archaeological site. It was a stage upon which superstition, science, and spectacle clashed. The world was obsessed, and every new misfortune added fuel to the fire. But if the curse was real, what was its true nature? Was it magic, ancient science, or something more sinister hidden within the tomb itself? The mystery deepened with every passing year. And soon, it would claim even more lives, stretching far beyond the deserts of Egypt, touching people who had never even set foot inside the Valley of the Kings. By the 1930s, the so-called mummy-esque curse had become one of the most famous legends in the world. For the average person reading a newspaper in New York or sipping tea in a London cafe, it was no longer just about a pharaoh's tomb. It was about the frightening possibility that death itself could be commanded by the long-dead kings of Egypt. And at the center of this growing storm of superstition was Tutankhamun, the boy king whose fragile coffin had been pried open to reveal a golden mask so breathtaking that the entire world gasped. Yet behind that mask, people whispered, lay wrath and vengeance. The unending death toll. The list of victims continued to grow. Within months of Lord Carnarvon's death, others followed, people connected directly and indirectly to the tomb. Lady Evelyn Herbert, Carnarvon's daughter, was said to have been plagued with mysterious health problems. Even those who never entered the tomb itself but handled objects taken from it seemed cursed. Rumors swirled that an Egyptian prince had been assassinated because he mocked the curse. A London businessman who purchased artifacts allegedly smuggled from the tomb died in a freak car accident. A French archaeologist involved in the cataloguing process collapsed suddenly in his study. His final words said to be, "The curse, it is true." The death count, as newspapers eagerly called it, reached more than 20 by the mid-1930s. Skeptics dismissed this as exaggeration. After all, in any large group, some will die from illness or accidents. But the clustering of so many strange deaths within a short period was difficult to ignore. The scientific explanations, in the face of this hysteria, scientists fought back. Microbiologists suggested that the air trapped inside the sealed tomb for centuries might have carried deadly fungi or bacteria. When explorers opened the tomb, they could have breathed in invisible spores that attacked their lungs or weakened their immune systems. Others speculated about toxic gases, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, or ammonia, lingering in the ancient chambers. These theories made sense to doctors, but to the public, they seemed unsatisfying. A germ was invisible and ordinary. A curse was powerful, exotic, and thrilling. The rise of the revenge narrative. As more and more deaths were reported, writers began to shape a new storyline. The Pharaoh himself was seeking revenge. The boy king, disturbed from his eternal rest, was reaching across time to destroy those who dared to touch him. Magazines published eerie illustrations of mummies rising from their coffins, skeletal hands stretching toward terrified intruders. Stage shows in London dramatized the curse with smoke machines, thunder, and actors wrapped in linen. Hollywood doubled down with horror films. The Mummy, 1932, starring Boris Karloff, played into the deepest fears of audiences who already believed the curse was real. The legend became self-sustaining. Every new misfortune, no matter how distant or coincidental, was woven back into the curse. A plane crash. The pilot had once flown near the Valley of the Kings. A man struck by lightning. He had attended a Cairo exhibition of Tutankhamun's treasures. The strange case of Carter. Through it all, Howard Carter, the discoverer himself, remained alive. He outlived nearly all of his critics, dying in 1939 of natural causes at the age of 64. Skeptics seized on this as proof that the curse was nonsense. Surely, if anyone was to be struck down, it should have been the man who actually opened the sarcophagus. But believers had an explanation ready. Carter had been spared because the Pharaoh considered him useful, a chosen messenger to ensure the boy king's legacy was remembered. His survival, they argued, was not proof against the curse. It was evidence of its selectivity and intelligence. A legend beyond Egypt. By now, the curse was no longer just an Egyptian tale. It was a global myth, shaped by fear, media, and imagination. It reflected anxieties about colonialism, the theft of sacred artifacts, and the price of disturbing the dead. And it showed the human tendency to prefer stories of mystery over explanations of science. Tutankhamun's tomb was supposed to reveal the past, but instead, it seemed to hold the future hostage. Anyone could be next. Anyone could fall under the Pharaoh's gaze. The world wondered, was this truly revenge from beyond the grave? Or had the story grown into something larger, darker, and more unstoppable than any Pharaoh's curse could ever be? By the mid-1930s, the so-called Curse of the Pharaoh was no longer just a story whispered among archaeologists. It had leapt borders, crossed oceans, and seeped into the collective imagination of the modern world. From Cairo to Paris, from London to New York, the tale of Tutankhamun's wrath was everywhere, spawning both fascination and panic. The panic in Cairo. In Egypt itself, locals saw the deaths not as coincidence, but as proof of what they had always believed. The tombs of the pharaohs were sacred. Merchants in Cairo refused to handle trinkets said to have come from the Valley of the Kings. Some workers who had once begged for excavation jobs now fled the desert, fearing that the pharaoh's gaze would follow them home. Egyptian newspapers were filled with letters from readers demanding that the tomb be resealed. "Leave the boy king in peace," one wrote. "He is no longer of this world, but his power still reigns." Others went further, insisting that Tutankhamun's curse was not just spiritual, but national, that Egypt's continual plundering by foreigners would bring disaster upon the entire country. Fear in London and Paris. Across Europe, the curse became both entertainment and obsession. Newspapers competed to list the latest victims. Spiritualist groups held seances, claiming to hear the whispers of the pharaoh himself. A famous French medium announced that she had spoken to Tutankhamun's spirit and warned, "His anger will not rest until the tomb is closed again." Ordinary people grew fearful of even touching Egyptian artifacts. A London museum reported a drop in visitors to its mummy exhibit. One curator confessed that the staff themselves avoided late-night rounds near the sarcophagi, muttering about watchful eyes that glowed in the dark. America's fascination turns to fear. In the United States, the curse played into the roaring fascination with the exotic. At first, Americans embraced the tale. Magazines ran illustrated features, vaudeville shows staged mummy reviews, and department stores sold Pharaoh's curse toys. But as reports of more deaths trickled in, the excitement shifted toward unease. New York papers began to warn travelers against visiting the Valley of the Kings. When the Metropolitan Museum announced a new exhibit of Egyptian treasures, whispers spread that anyone attending would invite misfortune. Still, the crowds came, some to admire, others to test fate. The ordinary lives disturbed. Perhaps most unsettling were the stories of ordinary people who claimed to be struck by the curse without ever stepping foot in Egypt. A young woman in Chicago swore that after touching a scarab amulet purchased from a traveling salesman, her health declined until she wasted away. A banker in Berlin claimed his fortunes collapsed overnight after he bought a supposedly cursed papyrus. These tales blurred the line between coincidence and destiny. If the pharaoh's reach extended beyond his tomb, then no one, no matter how far away, was truly safe. Governments take notice. The mounting panic did not go unnoticed by officials. Egyptian authorities, weary of the growing hysteria, considered halting further excavations. British diplomats privately admitted that the curse was damaging their image in Egypt, where resentment of colonial control was already rising. Some even worried that the legend of the curse might fuel rebellion, giving Egyptians a supernatural rallying cry against foreign rule. In the halls of power and the markets of Cairo alike, one truth was clear. The curse had grown into something much larger than a legend. It was now a political, cultural, and psychological force, one that neither reason nor denial could contain. And as panic spread across continents, one question lingered. If the curse was this powerful in rumor, what would happen if it was real? The curse did not fade with time. Instead, it seemed to feed on each new tragedy, binding itself tighter to the legend of Tutankhamun. Every death, whether connected directly or distantly, became another link in an endless chain, a grim tally that the newspapers delighted in keeping alive. The count grows. By the late 1930s, the official count of supposed victims had risen to more than 24. The list included lords, scientists, aristocrats, and even servants. Each case, when viewed in isolation, might have seemed explainable. Illness, accident, violence. But together, they painted a haunting pattern. George J. Gould I, an American financier, died of pneumonia just days after visiting the tomb. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, shot dead in London after mocking the curse. Aubrey Herbert, half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, died mysteriously soon after. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who X-rayed the mummy, dropped dead from a sudden illness. Arthur Mace, one of Carter's most trusted colleagues, succumbed to arsenic poisoning. Each death fueled the fire. Each obituary became another verse in the Pharaoh's song of vengeance. Fear in the archaeological world. Among archaeologists, a quiet dread began to take root. Some refused to join new expeditions to Egypt. Others took elaborate precautions, protective charms, prayers before entering tombs. Even local priests called to bless the chambers before work began. But these measures seemed powerless. Even those who scoffed at curses admitted to uneasy feelings when standing in the silent chambers, surrounded by walls painted with gods of death and judgment. The air was heavy, as if filled with centuries of warning. Deaths beyond the tomb. The curse did not stop at those who entered the Valley of the Kings. Soon, it was said to follow the treasures themselves. A British museum guard, tasked with watching over an imported relic from Tutankhamun's tomb, was found dead on his shift. A young boy who played near a shipment of artifacts developed a strange fever and never recovered. In Germany, a private collector who acquired a funerary statuette was found lifeless in his study, the object lying shattered on the floor beside him. To the world it seemed clear. The Pharaoh's wrath was not confined to his resting place. It traveled with his treasures, punishing anyone foolish enough to possess them. Carter's shadow. All the while, Howard Carter continued his work. His refusal to die became as much a part of the legend as the deaths themselves. To skeptics, Carter's long life was proof that the curse was fiction. To believers, it was evidence that he was protected, or worse, that he had made some secret pact with the Pharaoh. When Carter finally passed in 1939, the world held its breath. His death was natural, quiet, and unremarkable. Yet even then, rumors spread. Some whispered that on the night of his funeral, a black jackal, like the god Anubis, was seen prowling near his grave. The curse survives war. Even as the world plunged into the chaos of World War II, the legend did not die. Soldiers carried stories of the curse with them, claiming that entire battalions stationed near Egypt suffered misfortune. A bomb dropped on Berlin destroyed a private collection of Egyptian relics, and locals muttered that it was the Pharaoh's hand guiding fate. It seemed that the curse had woven itself into the very fabric of history. Wherever Tutankhamun's name was spoken, death and fear seemed to follow. The chain of deaths was not just endless, it was unstoppable. And the more the world tried to explain it away, the deeper the mystery became. As the legend of the Pharaoh's curse spread across continents, two worlds collided: the rational mind of science and the primal fear of superstition. Scholars, physicians, and archaeologists struggled to reclaim control of the narrative, but the shadow of the curse grew darker with each unexplained death. The scientific counterattack. By the late 1930s, universities in Europe and America organized conferences specifically to discuss the so-called curse. Papers were presented, charts drawn, statistics tallied. Medical experts argued that pneumonia, blood poisoning, or heart attacks explained most of the deaths. One theory gained particular traction: ancient pathogens. Inside sealed tombs, fungi and bacteria could survive for centuries. When explorers disturbed the chambers, they may have inhaled spores that weakened their immune systems, triggering fatal infections. Researchers pointed to traces of Aspergillus flavus, a fungus capable of producing deadly toxins. Another hypothesis suggested toxic gases. The slow decomposition of organic matter inside the tomb could release ammonia, formaldehyde, or hydrogen sulfide, all dangerous when inhaled. Modern-day experiments even confirmed that some tombs contained measurable traces of harmful chemicals. On paper, the explanations seemed convincing. But outside academic circles, the public found them bland. A deadly fungus did not stir the imagination like the image of an avenging pharaoh reaching from beyond the grave. The power of belief. Meanwhile, spiritualists and occultists seized the moment. To them, the deaths were proof of unseen forces at work. They argued that the pharaohs had been masters of rituals and curses, inscribing protective magic into the very walls of their tombs. The hieroglyphs warning intruders, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king," were cited as undeniable evidence. Seances multiplied. Mediums claimed to summon the spirits of the pharaohs, warning of greater catastrophes if their rest was not respected. Some even suggested that the rise of global wars was connected to mankind's arrogance in disturbing ancient graves. Archaeologists torn in two. Among archaeologists, opinion was divided. The younger generation leaned toward scientific reasoning, determined to dismiss the curse as superstition. Yet even they admitted to a lingering unease when entering the tombs. The smell of centuries-old air, the silence of the desert chambers, the painted gods glaring from the walls, these stirred something deeper than logic. The older generation, more steeped in tradition, often carried protective amulets or performed quiet rituals before breaking a seal. They did not openly admit belief in the curse, but they were unwilling to mock it either. As one veteran archaeologist remarked, "It is not wise to laugh at the dead. If the curse exists, I'd rather not test it." The media's role. Newspapers played both sides. One page would feature a sober medical article dismissing the curse. The next would run a sensational headline, "Pharaoh claims new victim." The contradiction sold papers, and the public devoured both with equal hunger. This duality, the rational and the irrational, was the true power of the curse. It existed not just in tombs or coffins, but in the tension between what people knew and what they feared. Beyond explanation. Even science could not explain everything. How to account for the uncanny timing of some deaths. How to explain the blackouts, the electrical failures, the jackals seen near graves, the strange winds that howled only when the tombs were opened. Every time scientists thought they had put the curse to rest, a new mystery emerged. The Pharaoh's shadow lingered, defying equations and experiments. In the end, the battle between science and superstition was not about facts. It was about belief. And belief, once ignited, could be more powerful than any microbe or toxin. By the mid-20th century, the Pharaoh's curse had transcended archaeology and entered the bloodstream of global culture. What began as a series of eerie coincidences around a single tomb now blossomed into a legend that seemed to live a life of its own. Hollywood discovers the curse. In the 1930s and 40s, Hollywood studios capitalized on the public's fascination with Egypt. Films like The Mummy portrayed vengeful spirits rising from their tombs, seeking revenge against those who disturbed their eternal rest. Though fictional, these movies borrowed heavily from the real-life narrative of Tutankhamun's curse. Audiences flocked to theaters, thrilled and terrified. For many, their first glimpse of Egypt came not from textbooks, but from silver-screen phantoms, rotting bandages, and ominous hieroglyphs. The curse became a brand, stamped onto every sarcophagus, prop, and desert backdrop. Writers and mystics spread the word. Novelists, playwrights, and pulp magazine writers also embraced the theme. Tales of explorers driven mad, of cursed artifacts shipped across the Atlantic, of museums haunted by whispers at night, all echoed and amplified the original story. Mystics published books claiming secret knowledge of the pharaoh's rituals. Some swore that curses were encoded in mathematical patterns of the pyramids, waiting to be unleashed by the unwary. Others insisted that the ancient kings had harnessed cosmic energies long before modern science. The more extravagant the claim, the more it was believed. The public's obsession. By the 1950s, the phrase "Pharaoh's curse" was shorthand for any disaster linked to Egypt. A museum worker's sudden illness, the curse. A fire breaking out near an exhibit, the curse. Even political turmoil in the Middle East was sometimes attributed to the restless spirits of the ancient kings. Tourists flocked to Egypt, some hoping to glimpse the mystery, others simply daring fate. Many paid guides to take them near the Valley of the Kings at night, where the desert winds whispered like voices from another age. Few returned with evidence of spirits, but all returned with stories. Scientists, frustrated but intrigued. Archaeologists tried to push back, publishing articles debunking the curse. Yet ironically, their efforts often backfired. Each denial was read by the public as further proof that something must exist. After all, why deny so loudly if there was nothing to fear? Some scientists secretly admitted that the curse had value. It kept looters away from sacred sites. If fear of supernatural vengeance could protect Egypt's heritage, perhaps it was not entirely a bad thing. The curse in everyday life. Soon, the pharaoh's curse appeared in cartoons, advertisements, and even fashion. Amulets styled after scarabs or the Eye of Horus sold in department stores. Children played mummy games in their backyards, pretending to chase each other with ancient magic. The curse was no longer just a story tied to a single tomb. It had become a modern myth, a living tale passed from one generation to the next, constantly reinvented but always retaining its dark heart, the fear of disturbing what should remain untouched. The shadow persists, yet behind the entertainment and commercialization, there remained real unease. Every so often, a genuine tragedy would occur, a researcher dying young, an exhibit mysteriously collapsing, a visitor fainting before a sarcophagus. Each incident rekindled the legend, reminding the world that beneath the glitter of cinema and novels, something deeper lingered. The pharaoh's curse was no longer bound to Egypt's sands. It had spread across the globe, a shadow following every artifact and every story told. And shadows, once cast, are not easily erased. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, one might assume the Pharaoh's curse had faded into the past, nothing more than a relic of superstition. Yet the shadow endured, reappearing in strange and unsettling ways. Museum mishaps. Across Europe and America, Egyptian artifacts continued to travel the world for exhibitions. Each time, curators reassured the public that the curse was a myth. Yet, accidents still happened. In 1971, the British Museum reported a mysterious breakage in one of its mummy cases, though the artifact was behind locked glass and no staff had been present. Some whispered it was the curse, striking against the removal of sacred relics. In the 1980s, a touring exhibit in Canada was plagued with electrical failures. Lights flickered, alarms tripped for no reason, and one guard swore he saw the faint outline of a figure wrapped in bandages passing through a corridor. Official reports blamed faulty wiring, but the legend told otherwise. The Tutankhamun exhibit of the 1970s. When treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb toured internationally, record-breaking crowds came to see the golden mask and relics. But rumors followed the exhibition everywhere. In Paris, several workers fell ill during the setup. In Chicago, a truck carrying artifacts broke down inexplicably 3 times in a single night. A journalist covering the exhibit in San Francisco suddenly collapsed while writing his article. His last unfinished sentence began with the words, "It is almost as if the curse." The case of the Cairo Museum. Even in Egypt itself, the curse found new victims. In 2004, a curator at the Cairo Museum tripped while handling a set of amulets, fracturing his arm. A week later, he was hospitalized with a rare infection. Doctors treated him, but locals whispered, he should not have touched the gifts of the king. Another case emerged in 2010, when a restoration worker died in a car accident shortly after leaving the museum late at night. His colleagues noted that the last artifact he had cleaned was a coffin lid, inscribed with warnings against disturbance. Tourists and the curse. Tourists, too, carried stories back home. Some claimed they returned from Egypt with endless bad luck. Jobs lost, relationships broken, health deteriorating. One family reported a series of accidents after buying a small scarab trinket from a market stall said to be blessed by the pharaoh. Whether coincidence or curse, they could not say. Others spoke of strange sensations inside the tombs, whispers in the darkness, sudden chills, the feeling of being watched. Few admitted these experiences openly, but private diaries and travel blogs tell a pattern too consistent to ignore. Science still searching. Modern scientists continued to dismiss the curse, studying fungi, ancient air quality, and psychological suggestion. They explained many cases as stress, coincidence, or cultural hysteria. Yet even the most rational researchers sometimes confessed that they felt something inside the tombs, a presence that could not be measured but was undeniably there. The curse in the digital age. As the internet grew, so did the curse. Videos of supposed hauntings in museums went viral. Forums buzzed with theories linking ancient Egypt to extraterrestrials or forgotten technology. Memes joked about the pharaoh's revenge, but beneath the humor was an undercurrent of awe. For every skeptic, there was someone who believed. And belief is all a curse truly needs to survive. A curse. Without end. Today, the legend of the pharaoh's curse still lingers. It is whispered in museum halls, retold in documentaries, dramatized in films, and debated online. Whether one sees it as superstition, coincidence, or something darker, one truth remains. The dead of Egypt do not sleep quietly. The pharaoh's curse, whether truth or myth, has outlived empires, religions, and centuries. It has woven itself into the very fabric of global culture, becoming not just a tale of death and mystery, but a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal fascination with the unknown, more than just a curse. What began as an ancient warning carved into stone walls has grown into something far greater. The curse is not merely about the deaths of archaeologists or the misfortunes of museums. It is about respect. Respect for the boundary between the living and the dead, the sacred and the profane. The ancient Egyptians believed life did not end with death. It merely transformed. The tomb was not a burial chamber. It was a vessel for eternity. To disturb it was to disrupt the very balance of the universe. The curse is, in many ways, the voice of the ancients echoing through time. The power of story. Even in the modern era, where satellites map the earth and science explains what once seemed impossible, the curse thrives. Why? Because stories have power. The tale of the curse speaks to our deepest fears, that some things are not meant to be touched, that knowledge comes at a cost, and that hubris invites punishment. Books, films, and documentaries keep the legend alive. Hollywood blockbusters weave curses into epic tales of adventure. Historians debate whether the deaths of Carter's team were coincidence or fate. Tourists travel halfway across the world just to stand at the threshold of the tombs where the curse was born. Echoes in the collective mind. Psychologists call it the power of suggestion. Anthropologists call it cultural mythology. But for ordinary people, the curse feels real. It lurks in the shadows of every artifact, whispers in the silence of museums, and chills the air inside the pyramids. When a light flickers in a gallery, someone inevitably says, "The pharaoh is angry." When a researcher dies young, headlines revive the story. Another victim of the curse? Whether one believes or not, the idea refuses to die. The eternal pharaoh. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the curse. Not the deaths, but the immortality. Tutankhamun, a boy king whose reign was short and unremarkable, is now remembered across the globe. His name, once nearly lost to history, is eternal. The curse gave him power beyond any pyramid or temple, ensuring that for as long as humans tell stories, the pharaoh will never be forgotten. The final warning. So what is the lesson of the curse? It is not simply fear the dead. It is respect the past. The ancients left behind a message carved into stone, written in hieroglyphs, and whispered through generations. Some doors, once sealed, should remain closed. And yet, we cannot help ourselves. Curiosity drives us. We are drawn to mysteries, compelled to unearth secrets. The curse thrives not because of the dead, but because of the living. Because humans will always choose to look, to touch, to wonder. The curse lives on. Today, in the stillness of the Valley of the Kings, where the desert winds sweep over golden sands, Tutankhamun sleeps once more in his tomb. Around him lie treasures, amulets, and walls marked with prayers to protect his soul. And above his resting place, tourists gather, archaeologists dig, and cameras flash. The pharaoh waits, silent, perhaps watching, perhaps smiling. For he knows his curse has already done its work. Not by killing, not by haunting, but by ensuring that thousands of years after his death we still speak his name in awe and fear. The pharaoh is eternal. The curse is eternal. And perhaps that was the plan all along.